is the anatomy of a pattern. Basic principles of ornamental surface patterns. But I'm going to start on a little bit of a philosophical thing. What are the obstacles to success for people that own equipment? We see a lot of people have equipment. We don't see a lot of output. Sometimes people are doing output and they're not sharing it with us for whatever reason. Sometimes they're just too shy, etc. But what are the obstacles? One is other things offer rewards without as much effort. There's more of an instantaneous gratification. I always say golf is more fun. Someone suggested I put a question mark there. I said, nope. Obviously, in a lot of cases, people have it, they like the idea, but the effort is more than they're willing to put in to get the results. Because, we have a drawer back there, you see our little pill bottles, and you look at this nice little pill bottle, you go, oh, I'd like to make that. But you don't see the 6 or 8 that were made in a progression to it. And each one of those 6 or 8 represents quite a number of hours in a lot of cases. And you just have, talk about Peter, the 16th one, he had a set of instructions, and the 16th one, he got it right. Golf is more fun than that. Because you go out there and you whack the ball, and if it goes off to the side, you just grab another ball out of your bag and whack it again, right? It's fun enough to drive the cart. But the other thing is equipment is incomplete or needs repair. And either you don't have the skill set or the machinery or whatever. And, there wasn't a piece of our equipment here that we didn't have to do repairs to, some more than others. One of them, we had to make a U-joint. We had to make a 3-lead worm, the strange pitch. It goes on and on. The linkages, parts were missing. You get an old piece of equipment, it takes a lot of work to do that, and you say, well, I don't want to fix equipment, I want to do ornamental turning. So that's an impediment, and we're really trying hard to get a network of people together that can conquer those issues. And we're trying to help some of you do that presently. So we can help in that one. We can't help in the first one. I can't make this more fun than golf, but we can help some with coordinating equipment repairs. 3, lack of knowledge and understanding of machine functions. I think we can help you somewhat with that. Yeah. For those who make it past golf is more fun, we can help with that. The other is the lack of knowledge and understanding of pattern formulae. And that's kind of where I'm going to spend my time today. But the understanding of machine functions. You saw some really awesome patterns yesterday that were made with a couple of cutters. And until you really see that, made that, it doesn't connect. So I wanted to talk about cutters a little bit this morning anyway. And we got Chris set up back here to describe what he's doing. He brought a pile of rings that are absolutely cool, beautiful. And what did you say? You use 4 cutters to make all those rings?
Let's say 4 styles of cutters, but the curling tools is the common size.
Got it. So 4 styles, and you look at it and you think, it's like, look at those patterns that Frank was talking about yesterday. You're like, that came from that? Well, when you get a better knowledge of the machine and you get a better knowledge of the pattern, the doors open up. And so I want him to talk about cutters here in a minute. And then we're kind of going to go down into the patterns themselves and talk about how patterns are formed and try to boil it down to its elementary level. So I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
And it's funny, my first OTI event that I ever went to was in Denver, and I felt like a young upstart. I think the average median age in that room was sort of like the White Cliffs of Dover. They're cliffs. They're in England. They're a couple million years old. This is going to be a really long 5-10 minutes. Okay. Sorry. So yeah, cutters, onto cutters. No, and one of the things that was very interesting there is they had a market, and I looked at some cutters that were on a table, and I didn't buy them, and I walked back 10 minutes later, and the cutters were all sold out. And then after waiting some months to get cutters, we had been talking, Phil Porter and myself mainly, but also, Fred Armbruster, Celia Coudreau, Eddie Bell, and, a host of other folks. Apologies if I didn't name you. David, of course. We sort of saw a need for maybe some cutters, to have some cutters made. So when we say they're my cutters, they're not my cutters. First of all, there's a lot of much smarter people who are much better at ornamental turning than I will ever be in this room who've helped with that. And frankly, if there's a cutter you think we should be making, they're your cutters. We need to know, what you're thinking. And, I talked with Jeff about that last night a little bit. If you've got ideas, send them to us. I can't make promises because you do have to order 30 or so of these cutters at once, depending on the style. But, if it's something that we see a need for, we're happy to do that. But the biggest thing that comes to mind is I had someone, and I apologize, I can't remember who it was, met so many great people here, asked me yesterday, did you custom grind cutters, or are these your cutters that you use to make these rings? And I looked at the tray, and it dawned on me that I really only used 4 or 5 tools to make all of these styles of tools, right? So we talked about it a little bit, and I hope that this gives you a little bit of inspiration. We can show you what tool goes with sort of what ring, or what you can accomplish with just some really basic tools. I don't care if you buy the tools from me. Believe me, selling ornamental tools is not my primary business, and it will never make me rich. In fact, it might someday buy me a cup of coffee. But the reality is, I think it's a hobby worth supporting. For some people, it's certainly a vocation. For us, we make these rings and we sell them around the world. But without further ado, just to talk about a few things. The first tool that I had, really easy access to, is now not here. The cutting frame that was here was actually indexable carbide. Was the indexable carbide fly cutter that uses the triangular inserts. I thought we had. Yeah, the flying saucer, if you'd like to call it the flying saucer. But a lot of these rings that have broader patterns and larger patterns here were done doing that. This ring here, for example, this ring uses the flying saucer. This ring is flying saucer. This ring is flying saucer. This ring is all flying saucer. The only one that isn't is this one here. By taking that flying saucer, by combining them with rosettes of different counts, by offsetting patterns, different depths of cut, you can accomplish a lot of things. And the real reason that all of my earlier rings were done with that, it was the only cutters that I had other than end mills, that I was using. So, I think the important thing for me is I really just started to think about that cutter, and there's a reason those cutting frames are so easy to turn into tilt, so you can change the angles. Don't forget that. You don't need to work vertically or horizontally. You can work at any degree in between there. And that's certainly what we've done for a lot of these rings here. But the other big one that I really just wanted to talk about is we've got a couple cutting tools over here. And the first one is this, here's the flying saucer too. I'll just put it right next to it, Christian, so you can. So there's the flying saucer. That was my first tool that we did everything with. Love this tool, replaceable carbide. Since I'm working metal, the nice thing is you get a lot of choices in carbide. You can get carbide designed for softer metals, for harder metals, for wood, etc. These inserts are cheap compared to, to full-size carbide tools. We have a host of them hanging around the shop, and I probably have 3 or 4 of these frames now set up with different cutting tools. But one of the first things that I wanted to sort of point out is this is a great tool. I don't use it much because I don't do much woodworking. There we go. It's kind of perfect. Thank you. So this is just a step drill here, and I was really blown away. Christian's got some great pattern samples here that are really incredible. I'll bring this over to you. Sorry. Great. So they're done with stepped cutting tools. And in fact, over here, we even have stepped tool here that Christian used for these. Let me see if I can orient that a little bit better. Steps are a little hard to see, but you can see those tiny little steps. But I absolutely love this pattern because it's using the geometric chuck, which I just finally used mine. So I'm super excited to go home and experiment and play. But you can do some really incredible things. This is one tool using the geometric chuck. And it's really absolutely awesome, I think. Great pattern. But this is sort of a use of a tool. This tool is designed, that tool that we just showed you that made that pattern, that tool is designed to be used as a drill, not necessarily as a fly cutter in a combination in a combination drilling tool. One of my absolute favorite tools, the beveled pearl tools. And most of these rings here, if they weren't made with either a square end mill or a round end mill, and there were really only 2 rings that were made that way, they were made with this beveled pearl tool. And I think it's a great example. These are just 3 different sizes here. But when we take a look at what we have going on over in our ring tray, sort of this area here. So it's kind of neat. These 2 rings right next to each other here, and this ring on the other side, these are made with the exact same cutter. So different count rosette. I think this is a 24, and I think this is a 10 on here. But here's a difference about taking a tool and actually turning that tool as a drill, using it as a drill, and then taking that tool and using it as a fly cutter. It's the exact same tool. I mean, the tool itself, right? And then, an interesting example is that same tool was also used to make, where am I? Sorry, Christian, let me find it. That same tool is used to make these 2 rings here. Get this tag out of the way. These 2 rings here. And there's a little difference. These are a little bit more oval. These are a little bit more round. The pearls that are left here, well, that's just the amplitude adjuster on the Rose engine. So different pattern there. And then, we take a look at this ring here, these 2 rings. These 2 rings here. This is the exact same cutter as well. And this is an example of using that cutter as a drill, but only going in a few thousandths, and then using that same cutter and going in for a full depth cut to get the full pearl.
By the way, Chris, we use more orange lace than we do either one of those.
What?
Chuck it into a tool holder.
Yeah. Oh, for creating a knurled, not a knurled ring, but just a bead. Yeah. You can tell I'm not a woodworker because a bead. That's called a bead. Great. Thank you. Whoops. Yeah. Like I said, we work a lot more metal. So the examples that I didn't pull out, but we've got them mounted up. There's a few fly cutters. This one ring, the barleycorn ring here, and I just saw it in the right here. This ring, sort of that barleycorn, that's used. I call it the Al Collins cutter because Al sent the design in for doing barleycorn. This is one of my favorite patterns. I didn't pull that tool out to show you. But other than that, really virtually every ring in here is made the same way. We can look at this ring here. This ring's actually a lot of fun. We've actually thrown some UV reactive pigments in there, so it'll actually glow in the dark. But this is done with one of those beaded beaded pearl tools, just by setting the center of the tool a little bit low. We've dropped the height of the tool, so you're only cutting with you're cutting with both, but you're cutting off center, so you're not getting a full bead. That's really all I have to say about it. I guess the comments that I would make, I'll give you 2 more examples, sorry. There's one right here. This is done with a square end mill. I think I used a 30,000th end mill on this. And I think it was either a 48 rosette or it might have been a 9. I think it's a 48 rosette. But just offsetting a pattern. And then this here was done, the golf ball ring, because golf is way more fun. This was done using a round end mill as well. And I guess the comment that I would make is, one, don't ever be afraid to modify a tool. If you think that the tool isn't doing what you want and you want to do some slight changes, these are really easy to change just using diamond grinding wheels. We do a fair amount of that, especially with the fly cutters, like that Al Collins fly cutter. I resharpen all the time. You don't need to buy a new tool when it becomes dull. You can sharpen these as well. The other thing is, don't be afraid to change the orientation of tools. Don't be afraid to take a tool and to orient it at 45 degrees. It doesn't have to be horizontal. It can be oriented at 45 degrees. Same tool, and actually I think same rosette, and just with different different angles and different depths of cut. I don't know. We chose carbide again for a reason, because it works really well with metal, and I don't have to drench my machine in cutting fluids like I would have to do if I was using high-speed steel. So we just use a little bit of wax as lubricant. Lubricant's always important. But think outside of the box. Take your head and turn it sideways, or take a tool, and if it's safe to do so, use it as a fly cutter or use it as a drill. The only sort of exception that we do want to mention is just that step tool again here. Tools like this that are sort of designed as a one-sided tool, these can be pretty weird to run as a fly cutter sometimes, but we're going to work on that, and we're going to come out with some versions of this that hopefully we can use for fly cutting and some other tools. But if you see something you need, something you want, let us know. But think think other ways about your tools. Don't just use them in one direction, I guess is sort of the moral of the story. You can accomplish a lot with a very little. With a very small handful of tools, we've made 36 styles of rings, or 35 styles of rings. That's right. I think that was good. Hopefully that helps.
Your problem is going to be that 40 minutes ago, we had not discussed you doing that, and you pulled it off that well. So you're definitely going to get recruited for talking next year.
You know I go with the punches, it's all right.
The beveled pearl is what did the middle pattern there. So I think he's a really good example of the lack of knowledge and understanding of the machine function here. A lot of people bought the cutters that we came out with a set of, 5 cutters that were bead cutters. And we've used them extensively here. And like for the modular box class, one of the things is people are like, oh, I didn't know I could use it that way. Or I'll put a bead cutter in the introductory class, and we'd cut the bead, but then we'd like twist the cutting frame and then cut just a little quarter round with it. Or we'd also do that with the eccentric cutter. We'd create a ball, but then I'd slide it over, reorient it just slightly, move your tool post, boom, tighten it down, apply, and you take the edge off of a sharp edge and round it out. You use it, in seconds. You change over and you use a tool to create a much different thing. Again, understanding machine function. So we will work harder toward that. One thing I think we should do is have a cutter class early next year. And two things with it. One, sometimes the cutter there isn't enough, I would say, market. There isn't enough market to do any of this stuff in reality. But there isn't enough market to get him to the 30 cutter thing. I just need this cutter and I need it now. If you look at the screwdrivers, Kelsey made the 2 little bead cutters for Seth. What was the second cutter she ever made? And you look at the finish on them and they're magnificent. I guess it was the 3rd and 4th cutters because you made a set. No, those are the first ones. We sent him the first ones. We kept the second ones. And we literally take that old watchmaker's lathe. It's actually an instrument lathe. The watchmaker's lathe back there. And we chuck up, these packs of Chinese diamond tools. We chuck them up in there. They run like this. They're so cheap you can use one side of it and be happy. And we very quickly knock off a tool. Now, it's not good enough for someone to sell and say, but they work fantastic. And you go through that. We have a couple serrated knife sharpeners we shove into the spindle, and you can polish it up to a high finish like you see on the screwdriver. It's a fantastic finish. And within a few minutes, you got a cutter if you know how to use the piece of equipment. And you're hacking it out. So sometimes you need that skill. Now, I'd rather buy it from Chris than spend the 45 minutes because that gives me 45 minutes that I could presumably be golfing. And those cutters that we made in the sets, they were intentionally made for you to modify. Once you understand how to modify them. So I'd like to run a class where we do a lot of that and focus on that. So if there's interest, we'll do that. Stages of learning. There's the raw experimental stage, and that's where you pop a cutting frame into the tool post and you put a piece of wood in the chuck and you start twirling the handle around and you see what happens. Remember how much fun that was for the first day or two? And then you really want something that looks like something. So what do you do next? It's the parrot stage, where you repeat what somebody else has done. You take a set of instructions. And this is what we do in the Introduction to Ornamental Turning classes. We basically have a set of instructions, and some of you have taken that class. And the first day, you are struggling with these instructions. You're standing there looking at the lathe and looking at the instructions, and you drop the tool post, the cutter in the tool post, and you fairly quickly figure out that there are predictable results. As much as you thought there weren't from the first stage, you realize there is. By the end of the second day, and anybody that's taken the class will attest to it, people are deviating from those instructions, aren't they? By the next morning, they are coming back with an idea, and they attack the idea. So they've taken what they've learned already in the first day they've worked, and the second and third day they're already experimenting, which is kind of the derivative stage, where you take a basic recipe and you take the side roads. You begin to learn very rapidly that way. So, saw a lot of that in Peter's work. He would learn, he would go down through, and then he would start deviating, and then eventually you design to the equipment stage, where you have a piece of equipment and you say, okay, what can I build? What can I make? You understand your equipment well enough that you see something you like, and you begin to modify it to where your equipment can do it. And then after you understand that well enough, you start to say, I want to do this, my equipment can't do it. And you begin to get a little crazy in the head. Before long, you're buying metalworking machinery, and you're making new rosettes, and you're making a new cutting frame, and you're changing your equipment to make your concept. So there are different stages, and these are just things I just made up, So, there's somebody had to make them up, right? But it's instructive in knowing where you are in these things, and you have to think your way through it to be able to do these things. So this was a picture out of the Plumier book. And I kind of thought, that's a really cool pattern. I think I want to make that. So now, is that bump up or is that bump down? I don't know. Doesn't really matter. But how would you go about making this? It's not a very good drawing, if you want to say. It's a woodcut. But, you got a line here, and this line is parallel. And this line is parallel. These two lines are parallel. Now, it doesn't connect. Okay, so you're going to have to use your imagination a little bit. It's a woodcut. What do I have that can do that? It's the side of a cylinder. All right, that's where I want it. Orientation is horizontal. What do I have? How can I do that? And I think we didn't have the made lathe yet. So the trouble I had was that my amplitude wasn't high enough to create the big bulbous cut. But you see two cuts parallel, and they're sine waves or something close to it. Shifted 180 degrees on the third cut. So one cut, two cuts parallel. Third cut, shift 180 degrees sine waves, parallel, shift. So two cuts, phase, two cuts, phase. You're moving over. You can see you're moving over a little less here. And we're moving over the amplitude there because you can see those two cuts are really close. I don't want to get too into that because it'll just confuse you. When we got the made lathe, I realized we got a lot higher amplitude in the pumping cam face or the rosette face. So what this allowed me to do is have a big enough barleycorn here, if you want to call it that I could slip into the middle of it Chris's framed pearl cutter, and I made the bumps up rather than scooping them down. If I didn't have that framed pearl cutter, I would have taken my flying saucer, set it horizontally, and scooped it out. Because presumably going sideways, you can see how it would scoop it out. And it would have given me something similar. But you got to kind of understand what's going on there to get that. From there, we went from there, and Christian really needed to outdo the old man, so he quickly came up with these that presumably look better than that. And I think they do. And they are very closely related. They don't really look like it though, do they? They're very closely related. So we're going to take, I don't even remember, but I think it's this one as a case study. And we'll go through a couple of them, but one specifically. So there it is. So you got the barley corn here. But you got these two little ones underneath, and then this tiny one here. So you got barley corn and a tiny barley corn, and you got these two. Now, what in the world? It doesn't look the same at all, does it? We'll blow it up. You start to see how it's the same, sort of. And look here, and you see here's the sine wave. You see it? So he's made the sine wave cut down here. So it comes down and up, down and up. And this one here is down. So he's phased 180 degrees. But what he also did, you see how this wave here and this wave here are in a straight line across? Now, if I were a little more steady, you'd see it better. So what he's done is he's phased forward and back. Maybe he went back and forth. I don't know. In this case, you start in the middle, so it's hard to say. But he's phased a quarter this way and a quarter that way, and what it's done is it's created the little corn here. But you see, this is down and up and down and up, and shifted without stepping over. We're going to go bigger. It's pretty messy at this part of blown up, but you see, let's follow the line. Here it is, and it dips down, goes up, dips down. See this though? There's your baseline right there. He did not step over. So he's made the cut, then he shifted forward, he shifted back. Are you with me? Got it. Very close to the same thing, right? Very closely related. Now, here's another one of those ones he did. He stepped over and shifted. Just step over and shift. Still very closely related. Same cutting tool, all that. There it is, bigger. And I think the slide I forgot to put in, and there's a elliptical box back there that he actually did very close to the same pattern, but he put the flying saucer cutter in, and he copied that, and it gives almost like a wedge shape to it. But if you look at it, it's the same waveform. A much different look. Now, what is this? Now, there's a little one and there's a big one. But as you see here, it's just the same thing, isn't it? It doesn't have the double cut. It doesn't have that, the one step side. All it is sine wave, right? Sine wave. See it? And this is longitudinal, but it doesn't matter. How do you know it's longitudinal? He cut it. This is on the reciprocator. Well, why couldn't you do this by pumping? And Wes figured it out the other day, right? You can change the variables and you can stretch it one way, you can shrink it the other way. He steps over, and he cuts it again. And the wave looks like that. So if you don't phase, that's what you get. If you move over in between those and phase, this is what you get. They look radically different. But if you take your head back to how that's created, you see this sine wave is all it is. And if anyone tells me it's not a sine wave, well, you can tell me it's not a sine wave. It approximates a sine wave. But you get the point. You see it? Now all of a sudden, the mystery's gone. Executing it, on the other hand, may or may not be easy. But if you don't know the path to execution, you can't even get there. So there are 4 variables for every machine. And someone says to me, well, I don't have a reciprocator. Well, do you have a straight line chuck? Okay, you got a straight line chuck. Why don't you do it on that? Wes was having such a good time on the Made lathe. He's making the pattern. He's having success. Just about the time he says success, I said, go over there and do it. I was almost that nice. So you got to do it over there now. So he goes over to the Lindow machine, puts the pin chuck in, and he duplicated. You got the pattern on that one too, didn't you? Yeah. Duplicated the pattern on the other machine. And he's got the sample, so you can look at them later. But it boils down to this. There's wave amplitude, which is the height of the wave. Wavelength, which is the distance from where it starts to where the next one starts. The step over or indexing. So either you're moving your slide rest over or you're twisting the part. Either way, that's the step over.
Yes, I did it this morning on the around the end of the part too. So that's the same.
So you've done it rocking, you've done it straight line, and you've done it pumping, and you've got the same pattern on all 3. Because I kind of derailed him learning guilloche, which is what he said he wanted to do, but I was just going to say that. But the truth is, and when I started doing this stuff, I had this lean hard machine, and I didn't know anybody that did this stuff. Finally, I got the number of John Sauer and Robert Sockaway. Sockaway's the first one I talked to. He's like, oh my God, don't take the machine apart. You'll never get it back together. I'm like, well, yeah, that's one thing. It's too late, but what am I not seeing here? I mean, this is like one of the simplest machines I've taken apart in a long time, So then I talked to John Sauer, and he's like, yeah, he's nervous. I said, okay, got it. But anyway, so I had the Fabergé case, and I opened it up, and they got this blown up picture. And I sat there with calipers, and I measured the distance between. First, I realized that a lot of the patterns were sine waves. So I measured the distance between the cuts, and then the wavelength, and I created proportions. Wavelength, the amplitude, height, proportions, and then I scaled it, and then there's this whole process. So in a way, that was a good advantage to me to think this way. I was forced to think this way because I didn't really have anything else. I had George Daniels and I had Martin Matthews. And George Daniels got me to the place I could make sine waves out of scalloped rosettes. Or, C-shaped rosettes. So, from the inception, I had my head into that. Wes is going to go home, and he's going to be able to apply what he learned, and he's going to very quickly be able to adapt that to guilloche work. So there's wave amplitude, wavelength, step over or indexing. And what that means is moving the slide rest over to the next cut. Sometimes you turn the part, as in a reciprocator, you would turn the part, right? But you turn it a distance, and you can go circumference. So you take the circumference and turn it a certain amount, and you measure that distance by measuring the circumference and then dividing it by whatever your divisions are. So, and and a slide rest, you turn it and you read the number and usually add and subtract wrong and get it wrong anyway. But then there's phase. Waveform is always set by the rosette, except on the reciprocator, which is always a sine wave. So the waveform is created by, that makes sense, right? Almost too obvious to state, but I think it's important to state it. So adjusting these four variables, you have the Rose engine rocking. Wave amplitude is set by the amplitude of the rosette. The only way you can change that is with an amplitude adjuster, which changes the fulcrum. Wavelength is set by a combination of the rosette count and the diameter. So you take the circumference and you divide it by the count of the rosette. That's going to be your wavelength. Sometimes I measure wavelength in inches. I never measure wavelength in millimeters. Sometimes I measure it by inches, and sometimes I measure it by degrees. And there are reasons for that. And I don't want you to head to go that direction, but I want you to understand that's it. Wavelength, doesn't matter what you put it in, use what's convenient. Step over is done by the slide rest, and phasing is done with the worm or the crossing wheel. Simple enough, right? Rose engine pumping. Wave amplitude set by the rosette face, mandrels traversing. Wavelength is set by the combination of rosette count and diameter. Still the same because you're on the diameter of the thing. Now, in rocking, that diameter changes as you go inward, right? Toward the center. Which, in some patterns, you can do it. Some patterns, you can't do it. And you'll see that on Wes's card as it goes around. You'll see how that changes. In pumping, it stays the same all the way down unless you're going at an angle. So wavelength set by a combination of rosette count and diameter. Step over is set by the slide rest. You move the slide rest over, the cutter moves over. And phasing is set by the worm or the crossing plate. So you phase the same way. And the Rose engine with a straight line, and in reality, straight line is the same way. You just don't do it with a rosette. Wave amplitude is set by the amplitude of the rosette. Wavelength is set by either rosette count or the ratio of the rack and pinion. And in, a year and a half, 2 years back, I had Wes make 3 more options of pinions for the Lindow Rose engine's straight line chuck, so that I could change the ratio and change that. And I had bought those, I think, 4 years earlier and hadn't gotten to it. I said, just send them to Wes, he'll get it. And he did, and he made spacers for them, and they could be quickly hooked up, and in the year and a half, I haven't hooked them up once. But I haven't golfed either, by the way. I haven't golfed since I was 17 years old. It was so much fun, I never forgot it. So we're on the...
I think you look like a golfer.
I'm offended. I identify as a golfer. Wavelength is set by either rosette count or ratio of rack and pinion. Step over or indexing on a cylinder is set by index count. Now, what I'm talking about is like a writing pen or a kaleidoscope is set going forth and back. And it moves around. It goes down and up, down and up. Or if you have a flat piece, the step over is this way. Now, on a straight line chuck, if you don't have a horizontal slide on the chuck, your waveform will morph. And you'll be morphed one direction on the left side and one direction on the right side. But it will morph. It warps the sine wave. It's really bizarre. You get away with it guilloche because your amplitude is very tiny. But on ornamental turning, when you get that, it'll very strangely warp your pattern. And it took me a while to understand that, and it was only by sheer luck that I had the horizontal slide built in from using the carriage or the saddle from the Shoreline lathe. And the Made lathe, we built it in, but we also built it in to do a pattern bar on the side, but that's another story. So wave morphs as the slides use. Phasing is done with the rosette by means of worm or crossing plate. On the reciprocator, the wave amplitude is set by the hole position of the cam or the placement of the eccentric arm on the radial arm. So you know the little circle that hits in the arbor gear, and there are different positions you can put it in. That's like the high and the low, or how high on the arm. The higher on the arm, the lower the amplitude. The lower on the arm, the higher the amplitude. Wavelength is set by the ratio between the lead screw gear and the arbor gear. And then Christian and Frank did a really good document on all this. We got it all enumerated there. Step over the spindle index and the diameter of the workpiece. So you're turning the piece on the spindle. On the rear, it actually indexes on the rear, and on the front one, it indexes on the front. And then phasing is done by lifting. You could make a phaser on there, but what we do back here is we lift the banjo arm and we turn the gear and we set the gear back down into the pinion. And that's how you phase. And it's not immediately easy to wrap your head around that. But when you go back there and do it, it starts to make sense very quickly. So I've taken you through the process. We start off with a picture from the Plumier book. I made it with amplitude of 60 thousandths, a 16th of an inch. It didn't give me the big bulbous thing I wanted. Got the maid lathe, I had higher, and then I wanted to be able to do that same thing on the Lindow machine, so I had Kelsey make rosettes. Now we're modifying the machine to get the pattern we want on it. So we've gone through those 4 stages, machine modification. And so we threw a rosette in the maid lathe, copied the rosette, go over there. And it came as a result. We understand the machines, and we understand the pattern. And he learned a lesson here, because on the first one, he only cut one side of the rosette. And the second one, I had him cut both sides of the rosette, because you get a C and a D that way. You know, the rosette he was using only had a C face. Or was it a D face? I don't know. It was convex or concave. So it was a convex face. I wanted a sine wave, though. So I had him run both sides, and that way I could pump in a sine wave by putting half the radius on the touch as I put on the scallop on the rosette. Yep. What does the fox say? Yep. And last time I looked at this presentation, that was not there. No. If you don't follow the fox on Instagram, you really should. That's on my wife's car. And what was thought to be a white elephant thing from the cellar, she saw about 200 feet away and said, "There's a fox on it." Anyway, any questions? I can always run back through the pictures.
Can the patterns that Chris made or a ring be done on a flat sheet?
On a flat sheet? Presumably, yeah. Yeah. Now, it may not be easy.
Yeah, probably not.
Probably not easy, but you can do it.
So on that pattern that you were developing, you were using the triangular insert on a fly cutter? On a flying saucer?
Which pattern? This one? This one was, flying saucer. flying saucer, wide cut. So it's the same waveform as the other one. You would do that. You'd make that ring with those little beads. Let's just say that. You'd use a little pearl cutter, if you would. And you would set your piece on your straight line chuck in a pin holder. And you would put it on the side, and you would rock with the straight line chuck down the side of that piece. Eric Spatt has made writing pins with flat surfaces with those things going up the side.
When this is over, you're going to have to show me that. Or just
What's that?
When we're done with this, you'll just have to walk over the rows and point and show me what you're talking about, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's going like this, right? And you hold the cutter on the side. I mean, but the work holding's the problem you got.
Yeah, but the cutter's still rotating, right? Or
Yeah, so it's rotating, and the machine's here, and the thing's going right. So it's entering it and it's exiting it. It's entering it and it's exiting it.
So it's straight line chuck that's pumping.
No,
it's rocking.
It's rocking, but you have your tool. You're thinking of the tool like a straight line machine in front of it. I'm saying you run your tool over to the side and it runs into it, rolls in, rolls out. So you have to reorient your mind to the side. Now, work holding is your problem, because you're the only person that wants to do that right now, And now you are to stage 5. You are redesigning your equipment to accomplish what you want to do.
That's like to a T, by the way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's exactly was my trajectory, like to a T.
You know what the next trajectory is, right? See, these compare to the rings of hell. You don't want to know what the 9th ring is in this world.
Which ring was it where the guys are getting kicked in the head?
That's the 9th ring of hell. Do you know who the two were, though? Come on. Who were the two? Judas? And the other great betrayer in the world? Who was? There were 3? Who was the third? Who? That's right. The kid outdid me again. So there's Judas and Brutus and Castus. Barry did it acting nice, right? Being kicked. You'll feel the kick before ring 9, trust me. And when you get home and you say you got to buy more tools after this weekend, Mike's going to remind you of what ring you're in. Mike's going to be the kicker, you're going to be the kickee. Joe lives alone, so he had to trip and fall. Sorry. Any questions? There you go, Andrew.
The UFO, that you're calling it, the frame flat cutter, have you ever considered actually just shaping the inserts themselves?
I could do that, but it's easier for me to grab a piece of 3/16 round carbide and shape that. It's easier for me to do something else. If I only had that cutting frame, absolutely I'd do that. I'd probably grind right into the UFO to do it. It wouldn't bother me any, to modify the sucker, whatever I got to do. Usually my ideas are bad, and by the end of it, I'd regret it. But that's ring number 7. I've had. I don't even want to tell you how many times I've done that. Some of you will turn red, but they want to get the big fat cutter head that's made for beefy work on the outside, and they want to get it into too small of a hole. So they go over to the belt sander with the bearing holders, and they grind right through into the bearing and shove all the crud from the belt sander into the bearing. Bad day. But that's only like the 5th ring of hell. That's the 6th ring of hell. You're trying to modify, but you drop a level quick. Anything else?